Welcome to the Movie Bears podcast, midday movie babble break, as we're calling it. Part of aGliff 33 Prism. We're here to talk to some filmmakers who have some films in the aGliff lineup. My name's Jim Pugliafico, one of the hosts with the Movie Bears podcast, and we consider ourselves a team of husky, hairy, huggable homos who love talking about film. Today, I'm joined by one of our other co-hosts, Will Lindis. So take it, Will.
Absolutely. I will take it. I just had a fun little dance break at the beginning of the show, and I'm going to continue the fun now because I'm joined by three absolutely wonderful and amazingly talented filmmakers who, if you don't know who they are yet, you're about to. First up, we've got from Tall Tales with True Queens, Kristina Budelis.
Hi, Kristina.
Hello, happy to be here.
From the short film Last Summer with Uncle Ira, we've got Gary Jaffe. And from Driving Louise, we have Isaac Knopf.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, Isaac. So I guess we'll jump right in to the film. So I guess we'll start with Kristina in her film Tall Tales with True Queens, which is part of the documentary shorts lineup. So Kristina, welcome. We're going to definitely go easy on questions, so let's just have a good time. First of all, thank you for this film. I think, to me, I think it says right off the bat to me how much better we can do kind of in the process of educating children for a better future, to allow them to kind of let them experience a wider range of things, and also a little bit about nature versus nurture, which I think is actually mentioned in the film itself. So I don't know if you intended to highlight it from the beginning, but it was wonderful to see how open and curious the children were in their interaction with the drag queens when being read stories, in stark contrast, unfortunately, to others who were protesting. So during the film, were you surprised at either how accepting the children were and or how close-minded some of the others were?
Great question. I think that we were very interested from before we started filming in like the children's reactions to the drag queens, and we didn't necessarily go in with a lot of preconceived notions about that. But it was really delightful to see just like how much they really loved the Drag Queen Story Hour. They loved the event series. They were just really entertained and delighted. We include a moment in the film of a mother saying like her daughter never pays attention during story hours, but loves Drag Queen Story Hour. And that was something we heard a lot. And I think what was maybe a little more surprising was even with certain older kids, they didn't even grasp that it was a drag queen, but it felt just very natural and fun to them of like, here's someone kind of playing dress up who's
in
a
costume.
great performer.
Yeah. And I think that's wonderful. And like I said, it's just as kind of a follow-up in that it's amazes me. It's been, over 20 years since my daughter was that young. And it just kind of brought me back to like how moldable and how understanding and open children are, kind of open vessels, if you will. And so I think that was wonderful. And I'm glad the film kind of that came across really strongly in the film.
Thank you. Yeah, we hope so. And I think that's something the event organizers are really conscious of too. And a lot of the books they read have to do with just being accepting of different types of people or like animals, as it might be.
Yeah.
But that message of just like openness and embracing diversity.
Kristina, can you tell us a little bit about the overall genesis of the project? Did you start by choosing the location in the group and finding the drag queens from there? Or did you find the drag queens first and work your way backwards? Like, how did all that come together?
Yeah, great question. So I think initially I saw an article about Drag Queen Story Hour, and I thought, what an interesting kind of unusual event. And a couple things happened after that. One was I was curious to learn more about like, how did this get started? Who are the drag queens? Like, what's the reaction like? And at the time, it's interesting, the event series has actually gotten a lot more press kind of while we were making this and after it's come out. But at the time, like, there were a lot of pieces about like this event exists and here's a clip from the event, but there wasn't much kind of going deeper. And so I was curious to learn more. And then around the same time, I just had a lot of friends who like had gone with their kids or who worked at a school that was having it. I just started hearing about it more and thought, you know, okay, this is becoming more popular. You know, I find it really, really interesting and want to know more. So let's make a film and dig in. And we started with, I was living in Brooklyn at the time. And so we basically just kind of found an event happening near us and we're like, let's go film this. And, you know, we got in touch to kind of meet up with the queen earlier and follow her getting ready and going to the event. And then from there, you know, we kind of got to know some of the queens involved and some of the organizers and some of the organizers at the libraries and got more tied in.
Can in the film, as I mentioned, we see some a little clip of some opposition and protests, unfortunately, toward what I think is a wonderful program. But can you tell us if the program, what has become of it? Is it surviving in libraries? And I know now during obviously during COVID, right? You probably cannot, but I mean, I can totally see this working as a, you know, drag queens on Zoom kind of program. I'm just wondering if the program is still alive. Hopefully, the opposition did not kind of squelch the program.
No, it's very much still alive and growing. And obviously, quarantine is a challenge, but they are still doing events on Zoom.
Oh, cool! That's really cool.
That's exciting.
I'm tuning into that.
Yeah.
And I think that the whole issue with the opposition is also very, at the same time that this film is very uplifting and encouraging about sort of the direction of our youth and some of the opportunities and experiences and open-mindedness that they're going to be exposed to, there is also the negative aspect that we're seeing, obviously. The opposition, the people protesting. There's a moment that gets documented in your film about someone bringing a firearm into, I believe, the drag queen one in Houston. In fact, here in Austin, we are not immune to that. Our own local drag queen hour has had a lot of opposition and protests, and it's not been a fun experience. But in working with this film and working with the drag queens, what's been their reaction to all of it? We got to see some of that on screen, but are they wanting to keep with it? Have they been inspiring others? How have they been dealing with the personal safety and fear aspects of all of this?
Yeah, I think that, you know, it varies. I'll also say we filmed mostly in New York, and there is, and we touch on this in the film, like there's less opposition there than in a lot of other parts of the country where pretty much every event has dozens of protesters. And whereas in New York, there have only been a handful of protests, one of which we did film and include in the piece. But I would say, you know, of the queens we spoke to, obviously, it is challenging for them. And there was one person we filmed with a lot who had a death threat on social media at one point, which was obviously really scary. But I think that, you know, they feel really strongly that this is a great event and that it's important. And that, you know, there are a lot of supporters and a lot of families who are so appreciative of what they're doing. So they are, and that's inspiring and kind of keeps them going and keeps them, you know, inspired.
Yeah. I Will kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, and I think you may have hit it a little bit, but did you kind of get into this idea of film because did you have involvement with the drag community before this film? Or I know you said you saw articles about the program and maybe that's what drew you in, but I don't know if that's because you know, had been going to drag shows or had interest in the drag scene, or maybe from an education standpoint, or just from a filmmaker looking for a great story kind of angle.
Yeah, so, and I should mention, I have a co-director as well who couldn't make it tonight, but I would say I was originally the one interested in this idea, and I have, you know, been to several drag shows and have really enjoyed them. I wouldn't say, you know, it's a huge part of my life, but I think that I was really kind of intrigued and inspired by the idea of this event, and yeah.
Well, it's absolutely such a creative use of these drag queens' talents. I think a lot of times we, and again, you touch on this in the film, I think we tend to think of drag queens at first glance as, you know, blue humor or, you know, adult nighttime entertainment. And certainly that is an aspect, and very valid aspect of drag performance, but they've found a way to channel this over the top creative kinetic energy into something that connects with kids where they are. And I think that that was really fascinating that you pulled into that. And I think that because this issue is still raging so heavily, more and more of these drag hours are opening up. Of course, they're shifting a little bit right now in the current times of shelter in place and Zoom and all of that. There is, of course, still opposition and the kind of the political aspect of all of that. That's all coming into play at the same time. I wonder, and this is sort of that unfair question to ask shorts filmmakers, so forgive me on this, but like, where do you pivot this film from here? It almost feels like this is the type of story that you could either continue into a feature or do a follow-up short to, or just put in the right people's hands so that they can view it and learn from it. Like, how do you springboard from this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you know, certainly with what's going on now, we're sort of on pause, but we've had a few reviews of the film of people saying like, I want this to be a feature, I want to see more, which is obviously something, you know, you love to hear as a short filmmaker. And I think there's so much more there. And so we're certainly kind of keeping in touch with everyone, keeping an eye on things, and may decide to do a follow-up in one way or another.
Well,
Awesome.
I definitely watch it.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Can't wait. Thanks, Kristina. We're going to transition now to the next film, and we're going to give Gary the spotlight here. Hi, Gary.
Hi. Nice to see you again.
Yeah. Gary Jaffe, is it Jaff or Jaffe? I'm sorry.
Jaffe. Like
Gary Jaffe, yeah. Who directed and wrote a short film called Last Summer with Uncle Ira. Gary, it's part of the Fiction Shorts program, #1. I should mention that up front. I watched this film and I found it really striking, kind of the juxtaposition of themes that are coming across in this film, like, you know, coming of age, obviously, sexual self-discovery, perhaps sexual identity discovery, and against a pervasive theme of loss in this movie. You know, and God, I don't know, loss of a family member, loss of innocence, loss of, you know, the last time at camp for a child, like aging out of something. That's a bit of a loss. Can you talk about that combination of themes in this film?
Yeah, I think maybe the best place to start is that Last Summer with Uncle Ira is a love letter to the uncle that I didn't know. My Uncle Barry, who died of AIDS when I was 3. This is my mom's younger brother. If you get to watch the movie, you'll see that Stephanie J. Block wears a Torch Song Trilogy shirt, which is literally my mom's. That's my mom's shirt. I grew up with, you know, her wearing that around the house in Austin, where I'm from.
That's wonderful.
I've thought all my life about that missed connection with my gay uncle. With, you know, we don't grow up in gay families the way that we grow up in Jewish families or, you know, Catholic families or whatever, you know.
Just straight families, right?
Exactly. And I almost had that, but I didn't. So the way that kind of percolated into Last Summer with Uncle Ira was thinking like, if a kid like me were 16 when his uncle died and almost had a connection, not quite enough to actually say the things, but instead to have some other kind of like moment of connection before time runs out, what would that look like? And as I boiled it down into this conversation, this like singular moment between these two, I realized like they can't really talk about it. So they're going to talk around it. They're going to talk about frickin' summer camp. which,
Right.
you know, they both went to the same summer camp. That's where the kid's about to go. When he gets back, the uncle's probably going to be dead. And how in like talking around these other things that can almost serve as metaphors for like the thing that they're actually talking about but can't yet, how can that lead us to that moment of connection and that acknowledgement of loss with an acknowledgement of like the value between?
Gary, one of the things that was really interesting to me in watching this short film is, and I know you and I had a chance to touch base on this the other day, so not as much putting you on the spot as much as I really liked your answer before. So you've been a part of the aGliff family for a bit now. You had a film back in 2017 with Sunset, and then last year you had Next Level Shit, and then of course this year, last summer with Uncle Ira. And one of the things that's so compelling about you as a filmmaker is that each of your stories has a different, maybe like a tone or different structure. You're telling very different stories, but there is definitely some overlap in the type of story at its core and in its kernel. Can you talk a little bit about your discovery and journey and arc as a filmmaker? Because it's very fascinating to see play out on screen.
Yeah, well, so Sunset is a historical romance set in the days following Pearl Harbor. Next Level Shit is a scatological rom-com set in, you know, any gay's nightmare, his obsessive preparations to bottom backfire, sending the relationship spiraling to a whole new level of intimacy.
Backfire. I like that.
Backfire, exactly. Oh, so many puns with Next Level Shit. That's really a very fun one to talk about. And then Last Summer with Uncle Ira obviously is you know, in 1991, and it's this very intimate moment between an uncle and his nephew. And I think what all three of these movies have in common is two things. One, true vulnerability and intimacy. Yes, Next Level Shit is a scatological gay comedy, but boy, is it intimate. I'm very interested in like getting really close to people's lives and trying to see, you know, what's behind the perfect masks that we put on, or the lies that we hide behind, or the excuses that we make for ourselves. So they have intimacy and vulnerability in common. But then there's also the theme of a more nuanced self-acceptance. The theme of Last Summer with Uncle Ira is that you can't accept yourself until you've accepted the people who have made you who you are. And that is rather complicated. Like the kid, Daniel, doesn't immediately go talk to his uncle. He has to be nudged into it by his mom, who knows who her son is. You know, she knows that if the son does not get the chance to talk with his uncle and really have that moment of identification, he will regret it for the rest of his life. So all he needs is that nudge, but still, it's sensitive. This is a 16-year-old in 1991, and the man is literally dying, you know, dying of a plague that the government still is not recognizing, that people are, you know, bullying kids at school for, that it's just a hostile environment for, and here this man is like sitting in the backyard with KS lesions on his arm, you know? And our protagonist has to go face that, knowing that he himself is of the same thing. So that's an extremely vulnerable thing. But by the end of this conversation, even though the kid hasn't really come out, we at least feel that something has clicked within him, that instead of being afraid of his uncle, he's deeply loving and appreciative of his uncle in a way that will carry with him in his own future. That said, the last shot is Stephanie as the mom looking out at both of them with concern for the brother she's losing and the son that she hopes to raise well. Sorry, I talk a lot.
Yeah,
we love it.
That's all right. And Gary, now that knowing your personal you know, viewpoint and how that informed this whole story about your uncle, I can really appreciate the restraint and and I think there's power in that restraint of like not having that direct conversation like that you would have, you know what I mean? Like if I could go back in time as a gay man or whatever and ask my uncle things directly, you know, the film does not do that at all. And so there's quite a bit of power, I think, in that, you know, knowing that going in. So you know, props to you. Maybe you can talk to that. Maybe that was intended, that, you know, you didn't want, you know, the the life lesson, like, well, if I could live my last years over, here's what I'd do again, something like that. We see that too much. But this film wonderfully like avoids that cliche.
Yeah, two things. One, I do put right at the start, in memory of Barry Reed Scholl. And we actually had someone watch it like, that should be at the end. And I'm like, no. I want it at the start because I want someone, when they're watching it, to know that this is personal, whatever that means. I won't tell you, the story. I won't pop up on screen and be like, this is a story about, but
Yeah.
I want the viewer to know that this is personal. And the second thing is, even though it is an imagined memoir, a chance to do things differently, I still feel like fiction has to obey the laws that my reality fit. I didn't get to know him. I didn't get to have that conversation. So therefore, Daniel can't either.
Right.
But he gets to have something else. And that something else is literally happening in my life now as I make this movie and put it out there for you, because Daniel's gesture to his uncle at the end, taking his hand and sort of that bow of reverence, that's the movie. That's that meta. That's what I'm trying to, give to you guys.
It was wonderful. Wonderful.
Absolutely. And I think that comes through very sincerely here. And I think that's part of the strength you mentioned of putting that remembrance at the beginning instead of the end, because it's not meant to serve as like a surprise what happened to the character as much as here is a little snapshot of a moment. And I think that one of the things that most cemented that to me, especially, hearing your story with it, but even on screen, it reads very clearly, is that it's almost like the letter, there's a theme of a physical letter within the story, right? One that the uncle is going to leave for the nephew, and one that the nephew is going to leave for the uncle. And in a lot of ways, not to psychoanalyze you, I don't know if that's what this is, but it almost feels like this story is a little bit like your version of that letter.
I think you psychoanalyzed it. I think that's exactly right. The messages left in time to be found. I mean, even that Torch Song Trilogy shirt is not only my mom's, but it was given to her by a friend who also died of HIV. So I'm very interested in these things passed along from one generation to the other, especially as the AIDS epidemic becomes more and more of a distant memory and a forgotten thing, particularly for my generation, for the generation after the generation that fought death and won. And that pisses me off. So anytime I have an opportunity to think about generations in conversation with each other and messages handed down and handed up, as the case might be, I think is a worthy opportunity.
Gary, we got time for one more, and it's probably a quick one. The mention of summer camp in this film. Do you have particular summer camp memories and experiences that maybe informed the story? I mean, I think of Daniel talking about, what was the courage tree? What was it?
The bravery tree.
The bravery tree. And I went to scout camp, so I went to summer camp as a scout. So all those things, merit badges, the tower, the life saving, all that stuff, and still have fond memories of them. So do you have those? Do you have that?
Both my co-director Katie Ennis and I have long histories with summer camp, and there's a Texas connection here. So I mentioned I grew up in Austin. 2 hours west of Austin in Hunt, Texas, is La Junta Summer Camp for Boys, Camp La Junta for Boys. Which was quite the place for a little queer kid who was not athletic to go. I've never been bad at everything before in a place, and but I went there for 7 years, and it was really transformational. But literally, they have the bravery tree, which I was always terrified to jump off of. And I put it in the script, and I was like, well, this is stupid. It shouldn't stay. And my collaborator's like, no, keep it, because it's like so stupid. It's like authentic.
Right.
We tried to rename it, but bravery tree stuck. So if anyone from Camp La Junta is listening, come watch the movie, because it's sort of reference.
And you guys came up with all those stickers on the trunk for all the years
we
of
graphic designer come in and we looked at, because both the uncle and the nephew went to this camp, so we're like, okay, here are the stickers from the 60s, here are the stickers from the 80s, and they're all on the trunk.
Wonderful touch. And thanks, Gary. We're going to move on, but last but not least, we have Isaac here. Sorry to keep you waiting, Isaac. Isaac is the writer, director, and producer, I think, for a short film, Driving Louise, which is part of Fiction Shorts #2 and available starting August 12th. So I would say look for Driving Louise. This is yet another different, but maybe some thematic parallels in that this is another beautiful and tender story of young self-discovery. And would have been the third one today, but it's the second one today. This time with a little help from another older character, more experienced character, who our lead character, and I'm sorry her name escaped me. I even went back and watched it a second time, said I'd look for her name, but I didn't catch it. But can you tell us how you wonderfully balance like the complementing stories of this young college woman with her journey with what we discover about Louise?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful. And I actually am happy that I went last because it was fun to listen to the other stories from the filmmaker.
Yes.
And I do see a lot of thematic parallels between these films. But I think the best way to answer this is to describe why I needed to make the story. And for me, like in my journey of identity, I like came to terms with that there's not going to be like this climactic point of clarity where I'm like, okay, yes, this is exactly what I am and who I am and what I like and how I identify and all these things. So it was very intentional and important to make this through a very queer lens where labels are hardly ever used in the film. And then the second part is that I wanted to make a coming of age story that shows that coming of age isn't limited to age. So the coming of age isn't just Ezra, who's the younger character, they're coming of age together, and that their generational gap doesn't limit the interaction and how they can learn from each other.
I think it's very interesting that you mentioned the no labels aspects of this, because that's one of the things that I found so very enticing about the story that you told here. Here you have two different women. It's a very cross-generational story, but both of them are bisexual, pansexual. They are questioning. It isn't a very cut and dry like lesbian mentorship story. It's about two people who have explored different aspects of their sexuality at different stages of their life, and so that was incredibly enticing to me to see the connection between those two. Can you tell us a little bit about from the script writing process, working your way through that story and how these two women who at the beginning of the story have really nothing in common with one another aside from they both know the same other person, and at the end of it they share this tender friendship. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to that and wrote through it?
Yeah, I would say that when I first started writing, it was mostly Ezra's story, the younger character. But as I unpacked the story and kind of just went through it naturally with feedback and with other writers that joined me, it became a very equal story, but also dove more into Louise's backstory and how that could almost conceptualize or visualize like what Ezra, this younger character, might be going through as well. And similar to how you discussed with Gary, I wanted it to be something where the direct conversation never happens. And of course, Ezra toward the end opens up more, but Louise never verbalizes, exactly what she's experienced. But there's this like mutual unspoken understanding, which I find very powerful in the queer community. And so I would say their stories just kind of overlapped organically. I didn't have like a very specific vision initially. I knew I wanted to have it be intergenerational, but like the balance of the characters and how they complemented each other just kind of came about throughout the process.
Yeah, until almost the very end, we kind of intuit Louise's story a little bit in very small bits and pieces through her dialogue, some of her lines, and the way she talks to Ezra during the trip. Which brings me to my question. I think framing this story as a road movie or as a trip movie brilliantly underscores the themes for both main characters, right? Because they are both still, I mean, even Louise still kind of on her journey. We don't know what the future holds for Louise.
Mhm.
And Ezra obviously is just starting her journey, basically. So are there any interesting or specific challenges to shooting like a road movie and framing it this way?
Oh my gosh, yes. I kick myself every time because I always bite off more than I can chew, but then I chew it all, and it's good by the end.
Yeah.
But this was my college thesis film, and I don't think something like this has been done at my school before, but I just wanted to just go for it and see what happens. And I'm speaking about this, just by myself on this meeting today, but it's because of all the people that I worked with that it was actually accomplished. And it was very important for me early on to have our crew made up mostly of women and queer filmmakers. Because so many of the sets that I've experienced in college and elsewhere have been dominated typically by white men. And that just, no offense to us, but that wasn't quite the energy I was going for. And I knew that having like these different perspectives and voices that usually weren't heard as much on set would really, really lend to a positive energy. And that is really why it was successful, because we all got along so well. But my co-producer, Angela, and my assistant director, Shannon, were my right and left hand women with concern to logistics and planning out this road trip and financing it. And I mean, we were already poor before this started. So the fact that it was able to be done, we feel very proud of and fortunate that we were able to make it.
Speaking of the logistics aspects of this one, there is a kind of a key moment, probably about midway through the film, where Louise reveals that she's been listening to this, as she calls them, the Young Giant song, and they put on this song, and they share a moment together. And I think that leads to some walls coming down, that leads to some of the later moments. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about that moment, the inclusion of that song, why you chose it, why it hit at that exact spot. Just how did you come to that?
I think you hit it right on the head. I knew that in the process of writing the script, there needed to be a very clear but nuanced moment where the walls started to come down. The walls described in Ezra's poem, and the walls between the two characters in the road trip. And I felt like the most organic way wouldn't be a direct conversation about circumstance, but more so through music. And as far as how I picked the song, I didn't like specifically say, okay, this has to be the song, like as I was writing it. But kind of partway through, I heard that acoustic version of the Young the Giant song, Something to Believe In. And the words resonated with me. And the acoustic version, I could just really, I'm a very visual person. I would say I'm like equal parts cinematographer and director. So I could very clearly imagine that moment of their walls coming down and like this montage of them experiencing this road trip together. So that's the best way I can describe it.
I think we got time for maybe a couple more quick ones, or at least one more. Where did you find the two amazing leads for this story? They were pretty much, I mean, there are a few other characters who do a wonderful job as well, but these two characters are really, really engaging. And where did you find them?
Great question. So Ezra is played by a wonderful young actress named Kayla Braxton. And she was at the Conservatory of Theater Arts at my school, Webster University in St. Louis. And then we had been friends before the project. I was her RA, actually. And I just knew that I wanted to write a story that could include a character that would fit her very well. And a lot of the traits of the character of Ezra are loosely based on some of the experiences Kayla was going through. And then as far as the character of Louise, the wonderful and sweet Bonnie Brewer. She's actually from lives in the Atlanta area. And we did a nationwide casting call on one of the online services. And she was one of the first to respond and was extremely passionate and said that she is
Oh, wow.
Louise in real life. And so we actually traveled down to Marietta, Georgia, a few months before to talk with her. And she was just so invested in the project and really believed in us. And as student filmmakers, to have someone such a positive force and to be so all in and passionate about the project, I mean, that's a huge difference maker. So beyond just being wonderful for the role, we've developed a really great friendship with her too. So we feel very fortunate.
Yeah, you hit the jackpot with that cast. Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
One thing that was really compelling to me to see realized at a specific point in this film is, I think amongst a lot of LGBTQ storytelling, a lot of the opposition that people face on their journey of either self-discovery, the external stressors tend to be the very blatant ones, blatant bias, blatant discrimination, which are very obviously real issues. But I think one of the things that was really interesting with your film is, even within like progressive families and progressive circles, there is still some of that same bias that exists within her family. She even has this moment where she says, look, my brother is gay and my mom is totally fine with that, but I don't know that I would be able to have that same moment with her if I came out, or if I revealed my truth. Mm-hmm. So I want to know where you conceptualize that. I think it works brilliantly within the film, but I'd love to hear a little bit about your process of sort of using that to capstone her moment here.
Yeah, I didn't want it to be the type of gay coming of age movies that we've seen in the past, and those are powerful in their own right. But I knew that from very early on that I wanted her brother to be openly gay identifying. And that that label of just being a gay man in the queer community is sometimes seen as like toward the top of the hierarchy. And so being a very clearly identified gay man in the film is easily packaged for everyone. It's easily digestible. I keep making like chewing and food metaphors. Maybe I'm hungry, I don't know. But But I just knew that would be easier to understand in the relationship between her younger brother and mom. And from her point of view, like if her identity is more nuanced or complicated, or she's more unsure of it, like she has this very realistic fear that I think a lot of queer youth go through of like, will I be understood? I might be accepted if I present it in this way, but if I present it fully authentically, is it too complicated? Is it too much work for the other person? Which is why we package it into these nice boxes and labels. And I'm ranting now, but that's where the poem came from. I wanted to kind of really, really dive deep in those 22 minutes to like what identity means and why we feel the need to identify.
Yeah, great question, great answer, guys. As a person who's more experienced, I guess I sometimes assume that the coming out process gets easier, as the decades tick by, and as LGBT is perhaps more accepted in some circles, but this film does underline that it is very personal. It still, causes great in turmoil internally, and this film I think demonstrates that really well. So wow, with that, as we look to wrap up, I'd like to remind everyone that all three of these films, Tall Tales with True Queens, Last Summer with Uncle Ira, and Driving Louise, can be found as part of the aGliff 33 lineup right now. So check the event schedule on the aGliff website for those details. You can also catch us talking to more filmmakers. We're going to be doing this again throughout the festival with our Movie Bears podcasts, midday, mid-afternoon, whatever we want to call Movie Babble breaks. And don't forget to check out our podcast for other film reviews too. We review other films from the Bear perspective. So on behalf of Movie Bears podcast and aGliff, I want to thank all of our guests today, Gary, Kristina, and Isaac. Thank you so much for sharing insights on these wonderful films. And we'd like to thank everybody who was listening and watching from home, supporting this festival. So take care, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, guys.
Sure.